So I just started shooting a lot of product, just basic stuff like Amazon, eBay stuff, shot on a white background, you clip it out, and relatively simple stuff. And it gets a little boring after a while, but it really just kind of helped me practice with lighting and all kinds of stuff. And I kind of slowly transitioned into a little bit more commercial type photography. I never worked for big companies, but I worked on some email campaigns that require a little bit more stylized visuals, like this right here. This was like something about skincare, if I can recall correctly. And it was a lot for like mass emails. And then these seemingly simple shots kind of usually have a lot more that go into them. They look simple, but when you look at behind the scenes, you see the image, all the C stands and the lights and everything. The rigging that goes behind some of these simple stuff really can be a little more complex than what it seems. And so this is where I really kind of started honing my skills in lighting and really seeing how light affects subjects and being able to manipulate light. And from there, I started doing portraiture, and I really got into portraiture. Like, I do a lot of moody stuff, I've noticed in my portraits, as you can see in that example there. But, I try and, change it up a little bit. The one on the left, that's my son. The one in the middle is my daughter. Just recently shot her, actually. And
hey,
then
the
one on the right, far right, he's a musician. So I kind of just bounced around a little bit until I really just found that landscape photography really is kind of where my passion and love for photography really is.
Roger, let me jump in there real quick. Sorry, I just wanted to double check. One person said they couldn't see the shared screen. I was just making sure everybody could see it if it was just a problem with one or two people. Or I can see the shared screen. Can everybody see the shared screen? Okay, it looks like everybody can see that. I just wanted to make sure. So
okay, no problem.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Cool. So yeah, I fast forward. I started in 2000. 2007 as a product photographer. Fast forward to today, I'm here with NiSi, and actually I started with NiSi in late of 2019, days before the official launch of the USA website. So just before we took over here in the US, we were setting everything up, and so yeah, it's pretty cool to be a part of something that's at the very beginning, grassroots. So to speak. And what I do a lot of is like kind of a technical service rep. So I help customers with any technical questions. I do live streams like this. And, we're planning on doing some more videos down the line. So just a little bit about that. But that's enough about me. We're going to talk about landscape photography now. So really, to get started and kind of go beyond the snapshots, you want to learn the composition fundamentals. And you hear a lot about, the rule of thirds and, the golden spiral and all these things, right? And that's because that's what's going to help you really just take your photos from, just, oh, okay, cool. Here's a nice scene, click, and then you walk away. Yeah, that can yield some, decent results if you're lucky. But when you really put more thought into it, you're going to come out with more keepers. So to start off, I want to just, emphasize that you don't have to have the latest and greatest camera. You can shoot with what you have and get some really great results. So by applying these composition fundamentals, you're going to see an immediate improvement in your photography. These principles apply regardless of what camera you're using. And, you can have the most expensive camera in the world and still take really bad photos. So gear isn't the end all be all. So just, want to keep that in mind. But when it comes to rules, I'm a firm believer that they should be broken at times, especially with photography in particular. These, I see them more as guidelines and suggestions, strong suggestions that will yield good results, but knowing when to break them can also be just as good for your photographs. So here are some examples that I took, with my cell phone. These aren't shots that I wanted. Like the one on the left, I was out and about, I was hiking with my family, and I had my camera on me, my real camera, but I didn't really want to take it out. So I took this shot, framed it up, used some elements of composition that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I shot it in RAW and did a little bit of editing in Lightroom Mobile, and those are the results. The one on the right, I shot it actually with my Nikon camera and my cell phone at the same time. And to my surprise, it holds up really well. Again, I shot raw, and I adjusted my exposure on the spot. So when you're using your cell phone, you really want to maximize your camera by sliding it up and down. I know on iPhones you can slide up and down on the screen, and that'll adjust your exposure. So you just really want to take full control of your camera. You don't want to let the camera make the decisions for you. So the same principles apply here, and you can get some good results. Another shot here in Washington. I was out and about with the kids. We were on vacation. There was tons of snow around, and I didn't want to be lugging around my bigger camera. So I just, I just used my cell phone, and you get some really cool results. But now let's talk a little bit more about the rule of thirds. So basically what the rule of thirds is, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it and know about it, but what it does, it breaks up your image into 9 even squares, and there's 2 intersecting lines at the top and at the bottom. And generally speaking, most of the time we use it as a guide to place our horizon line. Where should we place our horizon line? And not only that, but you can also use the 4 quadrants there to place elements within a scene to give your image balance and depth. So with this particular image here, this is a shot. It's actually shot by Andrew Code, and he's the owner of the company. And he shot this one with the big stack in the back, but that smaller rock in the bottom really helps balance out the empty space, the negative space on the bottom portion. So that's a real good use of the rule of thirds, and the horizon line is on the top line. So it really just helps kind of give it depth and balance. Now this next one, there's elements of the rule of thirds, but it doesn't line up 100%. So let me go and show you the overlay there. So we see that the overlay with the people sitting on that structure there, they're not exactly lined up on the bottom right quadrant, but it still works. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that we don't have to be precise and clinical with the rule of thirds. I see the rule of thirds more as a suggestion of how to balance out your image and the elements within an image. And I felt even though they're more towards the center, the overall structure, the mobile, the name and all that, it's very much within the third, the lower right quadrant there. So it works really well. The trees kind of frame it and everything, so it works out nicely. Now, when do you want to break the rule of thirds? Because putting your horizon line, at the bottom or at the top doesn't always work. So here's an example of when you do want to break the rule of thirds, and that's when you're shooting reflections. So with this image, if I were to have followed the rule of thirds and just been very, we got to follow the rules. We got to follow the rules. It wouldn't have worked. One, if I would have put the horizon line at the bottom, the lower line, I would have cut off part of the reflection there. And if I would have put it at the top, it would have cut off the mountains. So the whole image here is the reflection itself. So with images like this, where there's a reflection, the rule of thirds a lot of the times won't work for you, and it'll actually work against you. So here's another example of a reflection. And I could have used the rule of thirds in this particular, placing the horizon line not so dead center, but it would have lost a lot of impact. It would have lost some of the, the magic, so to speak, of the image. And that empty space at the top and the bottom really kind of just opens up the image as well. And it works really nicely with the light, the sunrise hitting the peaks of the mountains there. So everything just ties in really well. So the rule of thirds, again, technically it wouldn't have cut off the reflection or the mountains, but it wouldn't have looked that good. So this is an example where I broke the rule of thirds and it didn't work out quite as well as I would have hoped for. The reflection is a little tight on the bottom, so there's not enough breathing room. So the horizon line is not exactly in the center, but it's not on the bottom or on the top, intersecting line. So it was a mistake that I made. And when you reflect on it, you realize, okay, so the bottom needed a little bit more breathing room. It doesn't necessarily work. So I broke the rule here and I kind of failed. But if had I given it more room, I think the image would have worked out really nicely. Another composition fundamental is the Fibonacci spiral, also known as the golden spiral. And this is something that's actually found in nature. So you see it in flower petals, shells, tree branches, waves in the ocean, and various other plants. And if you do a quick Google search for golden spiral, you're going to see a whole bunch of in Google search golden spiral in nature. Sorry, in Google, you're going to see tons of examples of that in nature itself. So it's a really beautiful thing to see in nature. But this also works really well. And this is a famous image by Henry Cartier-Bresson. It's used a lot, but because it's a great example of the golden spiral. You see the staircases just lead you right to the cyclist. He's right in where the spiral ends, and it's a well-placed image. It works really well. So using the golden spiral and looking for it can be a little bit more difficult, but when you look out for it, it can yield some really great results. So here's an example of the golden spiral. Even though the deck, the dock here itself isn't curving, it still kind of holds itself to the image and it leads you in that direction, very similarly to what the previous one does. So the golden spiral can also be used in portraiture. So here, this shot of my daughter, you can see at the overlay right there, her arm kind of goes along with the curve, and then you have the flowers, and then it just wraps around right to your eyes. So it takes you right to her eyes. So it's very useful, not just in landscape photography, but also in portraiture as well. Let's see, leading lines. Leading lines is another aspect of landscape photography that can help direct your eyes to the subject. So here, this image here has a lot of elements to it. So not only is it using the rule of thirds, it also has the leading lines created by the water as it ebbs and flows. It creates these lines that take you into the image. So it's another cool way of directing your viewer's attention to the subject here. And in this case, it would be the larger rock in the back. In this image here, I used a combination of things. I used the clouds and then the mountains that just kind of converge towards the center. And then it just takes you right to those cows that are staring right at me. And so leading lines can come from many different directions. As long as it takes you to your subject, it'll effectively help in telling the story. And with this image here, you immediately go to the cows, but then your eyes kind of just can go to the rest of the image and you see the cattle herders right there. And it's just a very interesting scene that I came upon while driving up to Mammoth Lakes. And vanishing lines is another cool part of compositional fundamentals that we can apply in our photographs. So here, the vanishing line, basically, it gives the illusion of a diminishing road. So it creates depth and it leads your viewer's eye into the image. And so the further things are, the more they seem to converge. And this can be very useful, again, in creating that 3D aspect of a photograph. Now, I shot this exact same one from a different perspective, which really helps in kind of guiding your eye. So this is a little bit more, straightforward, whereas the previous one was a little bit, a little different, the perspective and the angle, but both accomplish the same thing. It gives the image depth. Not only does the vanishing point give it depth, there's an aspect of atmosphere within the photograph that helps also tell a story that, this was a very atmospheric day. This is actually one of the heaviest years of snowfall up in Northern California, and it was beautiful. Everywhere you looked, there was just snow everywhere. It was white. It was amazing. And so there you have that layer. As you go into the image, it just gets foggier and foggier. So that also adds to the depth of the image. Now, foreground interest also is something that is a real good use of helping lead your viewer's eye into the subject. So it's a strong element in the foreground that can help create separation and adds layers between the foreground, middle ground, and background of your images. And all of that, again, adds depth and a three-dimensional aspect to an otherwise, 2D flat image. So the foreground should create a focal point that complements the rest of the image, and it shouldn't distract. So in this particular case, this image here by Andrew, again, he used the rocks here on the bottom that lead you to that dilapidated fence, and then that fence also acts as a leading line to the mountains. And so it's just a very good use of foreground, midground, and then just the subject, the mountain. So it's a very good use of foreground interest. And negative space. I think negative space is probably perhaps one of my favorite things to use in landscape photography, because it creates a sense of isolation, loneliness, or it makes the subject seem more important also. And you want to keep in mind that negative space always lacks any major detail that will detract from the main subject. So here we see these buoys that just kind of like are out in the water. There's that structure, right? That little circle. And then all that water surrounding it, your eye just immediately gravitates to that particular area. And it's a very interesting shot. This shot right here, I gave it some negative space with the clouds, and it makes that the Korean peace bell a sense of importance, and it looks big because of all that negative space. And then I don't know if you can see it. There's a little right here. There's at the very top. There's a bird, and this was actually if I can recall correctly, I think it was like a minute exposure, if I can recall correctly. I did do a little bit of compositing to get the bird sharp, because in the original it was a little blurry, so there was some movement there. But again, use of negative space can help make the subject stand out. And here's kind of a nod to Ansel Adams. Again, using negative space, the moon itself just holds a lot of weight, even though it's relatively tiny within the scene. Because it's in all of that negative space, it really just brings your attention to the moon. And this one there was no compositing done with this one. I was driving down the road, and then I saw this, a very opportunistic shot that I took, and it just reminded me of Ansel Adams and Moonrise, and so I kind of went with that vibe, and with the post-processing as well. But you see how the negative space here helps to kind of just give the moon importance, and the mountains don't detract. It helps lead you to the moon. Now, another aspect is framing. So the use of frames within the composition can really help in tidying up the scene. So in this image right here, this is a famous spot up in Mammoth Lakes, where the trees here just naturally frame the lakes. It's called Twin Lakes, and it just naturally leads you into the photo. And I think it just works really well. So using naturally framing your subject with things that are already there can really help tie it all together really nicely. There's another image where the mountains here are kind of framing the edges of the image and leading you into the mountains in the back. Here's one of Emerald Lake. Again, the trees framing the lake and the image, tying it all together. So using framing the image within the landscape itself can really help tie it all together. Now, with all that said, I like to really keep it simple at times too. So I like a lot of negative space, and one of my favorite photographers, Michael Kenna, he he is a master at minimalism. And I'm trying to kind of follow in that aspect of photography. Here's an image that I shot while it was me and my family. We were out and about. We were walking down the beach, and I saw this. And I usually always carry my gear, and I had my 70-200 that day, and I saw that boat, and I already knew how I wanted the image to look. In a lot of cases, minimalism like this can give a sense of loneliness and isolation and a bit of a sad vibe to it. But this image right here, I see it and I think of, freedom. I think of being able to explore and adventure. And it's very different to the next image that I'm about to show you that is a complete opposite. I see this one, and I shot this one actually with a 10 stop ND filter to really get the blur and smooth out that water. But this one, it's a bit lonely and kind of depressing a little bit, because I think about someone who has to be there in the lighthouse and, for hours and hours. And I can only imagine it might get pretty lonely. And so, again, minimalism can either be, you can interpret it however you want. And that's the beauty about, photography and art in general, is that you can interpret it in many different ways. So here in this case, there's two very separate and distinct images that have two very separate and distinct vibes to it, using a similar compositional rule, I guess you can say. And here in this case, it would be the minimalism. So with all that said, you always just want to make sure you have fun when you're out and about. You don't want to get tied down to the rules so much. If you're not having fun, then you're not going to shoot your best images. You really just want to make sure that you're having fun, and things will tend to kind of start coming a little more naturally. But with that said, I actually don't think about composition as much when I'm out in the field. A lot of it kind of comes organically with light. So I don't know if any of you know the quote here, but it's from The Fifth Element, and it's a pretty funny scene. But Aziz here just kind of keeps moving the light from the archaeologist is trying to read some hieroglyphs on a wall. And that's kind of my take on photography. I oftentimes let the light direct me, and then everything else kind of falls into place organically, whether for good or for bad, I'm not sure yet. But here's an example of that. In this image, there's some compositional rules that are being broken here. The light rays are kind of leading you away from the subject, which is kind of that boat, and there's like a highlight on the bottom right on the water, but it still works because the brightest part of the image is closer to the center where the boat is. And so it kind of helps tie it all in a little bit, and your eye so kind of goes to the boat, and the light there just, it looked so beautiful to me that it worked. You may disagree, you may not, I don't know. But for me, I saw it and it worked for me. And so that was a time where I wasn't really thinking about, should I place the horizon at the bottom or at the top? I let the light and the clouds and all of that direct how I was going to compose the image without overthinking it. Here's one where I applied the rule of thirds a little bit on this one, loosely. But again, I was out and about. A lot of my shots, I'm just walking around with my family, and very opportunistic. And I saw this cruise ship, and the light looked beautiful on it, and there was that rainbow just right above it. That is not a composite, and it worked. And again, there you got a leading line with the rainbow. The cruise ship is very golden, very bright, and that open space again of adventure and freedom. It all kind of came together and it worked. And here's another example of me just letting light direct me. In this particular case, there was that one small break in clouds. And it looked beautiful. And if you notice, there's a tiny boat that, some might say, well, the shot doesn't work because the boat is not in the light. Well, it's a bit of, there's a little ambiguity here with the scene, because you can interpret it in many different ways. And that's up to the viewer to interpret the image. But for me, I saw it and it just worked. And I have kind of my own way of thinking, well, this person is looking for the light, so to speak. It's a little cheesy, but you know, it's how you see and how you interpret an image. And that's kind of what it said to me. And I thought it worked really well. Again, I was driving around Highway 395, and on this particular day, I was driving up and down the road and I couldn't find anything until I saw in the distance, I saw the clouds starting to break. And so I knew I had to go, and it was in the direction of Mono Lake. So I started driving down that direction. I started driving down the road that leads you to Mono Lake here in California. And as I was driving to it, I looked to my left and I saw this scene open up. And I knew if I kept driving, I would have missed it because it was already very late into the day. The sun was about to set. And if I can recall correctly, it was about another 15 to 20 minutes and it would have been gone. So I knew I had to be quick about it. And so I jumped out of my car, got on top of the roof, and I took, I think it was 16 vertical shots, and I stitched it together. Again, with no particular composition in mind other than just letting the light organically tell me how to frame my subject. And I still haven't decided if that's a good thing or not, but so far I've been liking the results. And so I think this image works really well. It's a little bit ominous, but it's a little bit bright and happy as well. Something about it, it's a little eclectic kind of, and it just works for me at least. Now, focal length is another aspect of our photography that we can really play with. Our choice in lens can really change the landscape. So here's an example. Here's a shot by Andrew that you see one shot wider, the other one shot a little more telephoto, and you can see the effect on the mountains in particular. The wider shot, the mountains look smaller, but the telephoto shot, the mountains are much larger. And so, and the hills just seem bigger too. So none is better than the other. It really depends on your preference as a photographer, what you're trying to portray with that particular image or what you're trying to say with that shot, you know. So all that to say, experiment with letting the light direct you, experiment with your focal length, and don't get bogged down with these rules. Know them, study them, and really have them in the back of your head so that while you're out there, you can make conscientious choices. But sometimes the more you do it, the more you study it, it kind of becomes second nature and things just kind of start falling into place organically. So once you got all that down and you want to take the next step, well, you can throw on filters. And I found that filters can really add to the creativity, to an artist's creativity, because it opens up a world otherwise not really possible in photography. You can't go out in midday and do a long exposure because it's just too much light. So an ND filter, what it does, it cuts the amount of light hitting your sensor. So ND filters will darken the entire image, allowing you to slow down your shutter speed or open up your aperture, depending on what it is you're trying to do and the creative vision that you have. So when you close down your aperture, then you have to increase your exposure length. Sorry. And what that will do, that will blur motion. So things such as moving clouds will streak just like in that image here. So the camera settings for landscape photography are usually pretty basic. You will shoot between an aperture of f8 through 16. In your ISO, you usually want to go the smallest, because the higher ISO, the noisier and grainier your images will be. With modern cameras, you can go pretty high on your ISO, but the whole point is to extend the exposure time, so you can get those creative effects that an ND filter will give you. And so the shutter speed is where you really kind of start, where you can be really creative with it, especially in landscape photography. It's opposite when you're shooting video. If you're shooting video, where you can really be creative is with your aperture, because your aperture is going to control the depth of field. And so you can either get those bokeh balls in the background if you wanted to, if that's what you're going for, or, you know, or not. So depending on what you're shooting, if you're shooting video, you know, you switch it up with your aperture. But if you're focused on landscape photography, then you can really get that length of time within the frame by increasing your exposure time. So here's, you know, a general guideline of exposure times. So if you're shooting seascapes and water flows, you know, 0.5 seconds to a second, maybe 2 seconds, moving traffic and so on and so forth, waterfalls, 2 to 10 seconds. Again, these aren't rules that you need to follow. They're just suggestions. And as you see the results, that's the great thing about digital photography, is that we can see the results right away. And if it doesn't meet your expectation or your vision, then you can switch it up. You can increase it or decrease it as needed. But, you know, that's kind of, this is generally where a lot of landscape photographers fall when they're shooting and using ND filters. So for this shot right here, I use 1/4 of a second. And I stitched 3 shots together. My 24 millimeter wasn't wide enough, and I just took 3 shots and stitched them together. So again, I experimented with this one. I went really long. It just didn't, it was too creamy. It just didn't look right. And I didn't want to fully stop the water flow. So I wanted that, you know, the motion of the water to come out. And so I've landed on 1/4 of a second, and it worked. Now, shooting sunrise and sunset can be very tricky because the light changes very quickly. And generally speaking, you want to maximize the opportunity by shooting shorter exposures. A 10 stop will dramatically increase your exposure time during those hours. So 5 to 10 minutes before sunrise or sunset, you know, your exposure is going to really, you know, be pretty long, especially if you're shooting with a 10 stop. And so you might only get 1 shot, maybe 2 shots if you're using something so dense. And the only time you want to go that dense is if you have something very particular in mind. But keep in mind, that's it. That's it for once that time is up, you're not getting that beautiful light back. So here's an example of being very precise, or I can't find the word yet. Here, example of why you would want to use a really long exposure. So this image right here, it was shot in Marina del Rey, and this is a 1,785 second exposure. And if you're really good at math, you'll know that that's 30 minutes. But I didn't know that, so I had to calculate it. So here I created my own atmosphere with long exposure. This 30-minute exposure, I stacked a 10 and a 6 stop. So 16 stops altogether. And it made the water just look like complete mist. And that's precisely what I was going for. I had no time for anything else after that because the sunset was over. Once this shot was done, that was it. There was nothing else to do. So I just had that 1 shot for that 1 sunset. But it was deliberate. That's the word I was looking for. It was very deliberate. So if you don't know why you're putting on such a dense filter on your camera, I would recommend that you just take multiple shorter bursts and experiment that way. And then eventually you'll get into a groove and you'll see a scene one day and be like, I really think that this, you know, 15, 20 stop filter would make the image look like this. And so that's when you go ahead and you pop in that really dense filter and you get something very unique like this. And it gives it a very eerie feeling, and, you know, I like it. So one thing that I want to mention actually about 30-minute exposures like this is you want to make sure that you cover your viewfinder. Because if you don't cover, especially if you're shooting with a DSLR, with a mirror, if you don't cover your viewfinder, you're going to get light leaks. And those 30 minutes, they're going to be wasted. So it's absolutely vital that you cover your viewfinder. Now, this is a bad picture. The next two that I'm going to show you are terrible pictures, but it's a good illustration as to how quickly light changes and how many different shots you can get, different looking shots you can get within a short period of time. So this was shot at 7:34 a.m. You can see there's a lot of yellows. The clouds are darker in this. And then this image was at 7:35. So a minute difference between the two. And you see quite a bit difference in the colors in the sky, the clouds. They look very, very different. That's only a minute difference. Here at 7:39, again, they changed very quickly. Now the sky is a lot bluer, but the clouds now have more color in them. So here's the two side by side. 5-minute difference between these two shots. And so all that to say that you can get a lot of cool shots if you're well prepared and already have compositions in mind by doing shorter bursts. So doing, 30 seconds as opposed to 5 minutes can yield you, a couple of great shots within a short period. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get great shots in this day because I wasn't well prepared. I wasn't planned. I hadn't planned anything. I was very new to this area. My family and we went to Washington State, and we stayed at a resort there. And, I didn't know the land. I didn't know the area. But I saw this as we were driving up, and I stopped, and all right, let's try it out. But it didn't work. Now, here's another example of the time and how quickly it changes, but also the difference in when you do plan a shot. So I remember this particular day. This is Lake Tahoe. I scouted the location a little bit, and I saw it, and I was like, okay, this could work. And so I got up early in the morning, and I already knew where I was going to go. And so I set up my camera, and I got this shot, which I like. It's simple, it's minimal. It's all about the reflections and the mountains. So here you see, I think, oh yeah, this is the next one. These are shot 6 minutes apart. So from that to that, 6 minutes, both drastically different images in terms of the light and how it looks and the style and the vibe and all that. And I also use a 10 stop here to really smooth out that water and give it that glass, mirror-like reflection. Here is an example of another, I think this is a 10 stop as well. This is a 10 stop. You look at on the left and you look at the right, they're very different images. Same scene, but completely different, because the filter here is allowing you to drag your shutter or increase the exposure time. So whatever is moving is going to be blurred out. And that's what's happening with the clouds. Same thing with the water there. The water is just constantly moving. And so it just becomes this glass-like, surface, and the clouds just become this streak of colors in the sky. This is shot in midday. This is the importance of using why you would want something like a very dense filter, like a 15 stop. This was shot with a 15 stop filter midday. Something like this, no matter if you stop down to f22, even some lenses go as small as f32, and you go to ISO 50 on a modern camera. My Nikon can go down to ISO 50. You're not going to be able to extend your exposure time long enough to capture an image like this. So this is where an ND filter, a very dense one like 15 stop, will open up that creative world and open up the possibilities of what can be shot. So not only is it creating that streak of clouds on the top, if you notice and you're close enough, anything that's moving will be blurred. And if they're moving quick enough, they'll disappear. So you see a lot of people down by the shore of the beach are gone. And that's because as they're moving, they're not going to appear in the image. So there's not enough light to capture any detail of them moving across, so they disappear. That's a really cool aspect of using filters that helps open up that world where you don't have to, do a lot of cloning and all that stuff. If you just want to remove people, you can do a really long exposure and you can get some unique shots in a very crowded area. Now, graduated filters are, basically, actually, you know what? I have one right here. All they do is they go from dark to light. And then there's different styles of gradation. So this is a soft. You have a soft, a medium, a hard, and a reverse. And basically what they do is they help balance out the dynamic range in a scene, especially when you're shooting a sunset. The sky is going to be really bright and your foreground is going to be really dark. So what a graduated filter does, it just helps balance that exposure out, where you can get a good exposure on the foreground by not overexposing your sky. And so there's various different types of graduated filters, and the difference would be in the gradation. Some are, a little bit longer and smoother, whereas the medium is a little sharper. You can see it in the image where the gradation is a little shorter. And then a hard graduated filter is in a very abrupt line. That's going to work pretty much only with a very clear horizon line with nothing, protruding out of the horizon, like a mountain or a boat or anything like that. You want to have a very clean horizon for the hard GND to really work. If you were to use a hard GND, say, with mountains, you're going to see a very dark line right in the middle of your frame, and that's not going to be very pleasing to look at. It'll ruin your shot. And a reverse grad, all that is basically, I have it right here. Instead of it going from dark to light, it starts off dark in the middle and it gets lighter as you go up. And so that's very specific for shots where the sun is closest to the horizon, because the horizon is going to be your brightest part at that point. So if the sun, like in that image there, it's just about to dip behind the mountains, so it's going to be very bright there, but the top part of the sky isn't going to be as bright. So you don't need to darken it as much as you do the horizon in that particular area. And the great thing about grads too is you don't always have to use it for the sky. In this particular shot, I actually reversed it and I used it for the sand. The sand was reflecting a lot of light in this particular scene, and so I didn't like it. And so I flipped it. Instead of darkening the sky, I darkened the sand. So you don't always have to use it for the sky. You don't always have to use it vertically. You can use it, from left to right, right to left. However, at an angle, it's up to you, wherever you want to cut the light. There's a lot of latitude there to be able to move it as you would like. So here it's just, a soft grad. We went through some of these images already, but it shows you the effect. A soft grad will work with a scene like this. A medium grad, the horizon, there's not much popping out of the horizon, so a medium will work really well right here, whereas a soft wouldn't work as much, but you play with it and you get the results you play with it and then you see what works and gets you the results that you need. So every scene is different. Let me go to some of these. So this is before. You can see that the sky is really overexposed. It's blown out. And here's with it after. So before, after. Pretty big difference, and saves you a lot of time in Photoshop and Lightroom. Because another one, here's before and after. Before, after. So real big difference. So how to use it? Fairly simple. You have your holder, you insert it, and then you just slide it up and down until you basically have it where you want it. And that's where using live view comes in really handy. Live view will help show you exactly what you're going to get, and you just adjust it. And the V6 is great because once you got it into place, especially if you're using it and you don't have it exactly vertical, if you're say you want it at an angle, you can lock it into place so that when you insert your other filter, it won't disturb it, it won't move. Because if you have it at an angle and then you insert your tent stop, then you're gonna have to kind of take out the tent stop, and then you're gonna have to rotate it again and find the spot that you had it in. And with the V6, you can lock it into place, insert any additional filters, and it won't move. So that's a really cool feature of the V6. Now the CPL is actually one of the most used filters, at least for me, and a lot of other photographers that I know. They use CPLs more regularly than they do the ND filters, and that's because it really helps cut the glare off of surfaces. If it's metallic, it's not going to work, but any non-metallic surface like water, rocks, foliage, and things like that, it'll really help cut through all that glare and bring detail back into the image. So we have an example right here. You have the non-polarized on the left, and you have the polarized on the right. And it's a huge difference. All that detail from underneath the water just, it jumps at you. So a CPL, more often than not, is the filter that you're going to be using. You don't always need it, but it's, you'll find yourself using it more often than you think. So again, it's really just about reading the situation and, okay, does it call for a CPL? Does it not? These are things that the more you do it, the more you'll kind of know as you approach a scene. Now, a little bit about planning. One of the biggest things that I found that really helps in kind of being a little more consistent is planning your shots a little bit. So I have, this is Google Maps, at Google Earth actually. You can nowadays punch in some coordinates and really get a sense of the landscape, really get a sense of the surrounding area, and get an idea of where you're going, what it looks like, so that you already kind of have an idea of where you want to be for sunrise or sunset. So that's a very useful tool. It's something that I didn't do when I went to Washington, and I ended up not knowing where to shoot. So when you start planning and looking ahead, you'll find that you're going to get more keepers. Now, another app that I like to use is a Sun Surveyor. There's also another one called Photo Pills. That one's very popular. And basically all it does, it tells you the direction, where the sun's going to be at any given time of the day, and even into the future. So if you have a particular spot that you want to go to, and you want the sun or the moon in a very particular area, you can calculate that and know when it's going to happen, know at what time and what day it's going to be in the exact location that you want it, and you can save it, and you can go back when the time arrives, and you'll get that shot without having to really just guess, oh, well, when's the sun going to be here, or none of that stuff. It really helps in planning your shots. And it also gives you the Milky Way core and tons of other information. And this is another one that I like to use also. It's called, I forgot what it was called, Clear Outside. What that does, I skipped ahead. There you go. Okay. So what that does, it basically gives you cloud coverage. And it's a very useful app. It tells you how much total cloud you're going to have, how much low cloud, mid cloud, and high cloud. And the mid and high clouds are the clouds that usually are the ones that light up. So if you want a very colorful sunrise or sunset, you want medium clouds or preferably high clouds. And that's what's, knowing that and having that information ahead of time is really going to help in getting good shots that you're going to be real happy with. And this is another, app, YR, that very, very similar, but it's a little bit more visual. This is California. So when I did this little video clip here, there's not a lot of clouds. So it's really hard to come by clouds here in Los Angeles. But anyway, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. And so with that, you just want to be open. Don't box yourself into any particular idea. Don't feel the need to always shoot wide. Shoot with a telephoto lens. Sometimes just shooting a small vignette of nature can really yield some great results. I particularly like this image here. It was very foggy. We were driving up to Yosemite, and I saw the conditions around me, so I jumped out of the car, and I captured this image, and it's different. It's not a grand epic vista, but it's different and something that I can proudly display. There's another shot of clouds just going through the trees. It was a very foggy day. Again, driving through Yosemite now. We're in the park, and it looked amazing. And so, I'm gonna shoot a small vignette of nature here. Going back to this shot, we were on the 395, as I mentioned, and how often do you see, a bunch of cows and, cattle herders on the road? I certainly don't see it very often, so I had to stop. I actually passed them up, and my wife told me, you know what, you should probably pull over and shoot it, because you're never going to see this again. And she was right. So I pulled over, I turned around, and I actually ended up talking to one of them, and it was very cool. I got multiple shots of them. This one, I was hanging out of the car. We were driving. We were going about 65, 70 miles an hour, and I had my lens hanging out of the passenger window. And I was snapping away, and I came out with this, and I think it's a pretty cool shot. So again, don't box yourself in. Use these compositional tips not as a hard set rule, but just have them in the back of your head and study them. And, things will you'll organically just start, using them without even knowing that you're using them when you're out shooting. Now, a quick little tip that I wanted to add, we're almost done here, is this right here. This looks like just a pen, right? But it's not just a pen. It actually has a little bit of gaff tape. Remember I told you that you need to cover your viewfinder? I have some gaff tape here, and I always use this to cover. So this is always in my camera bag. Let me see if you guys can see it right there. This is always in my camera bag. And so I know I use filters a lot, and so I just have a couple of rolls of pieces of gaff tape on my pen, and I know that I will always have something to cover my viewfinder with. So I can't take credit for that. I got that tip from Scott Kelby, not personally, but one of his videos, and it's a very cool tip. So use it. It'll come in very handy. And that's it. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask. But yeah, before I forgot to mention that, Action Camera we're running a 15% off sale. So it ends June 2nd. So, it's if you're looking to dive into, filters and long exposures, now's the time to do it. You're going to get 15% off. But yeah, so now back to Chris.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Roger. Awesome work. Really loved seeing all those photographs and great info there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, so we are doing, just to reiterate that, we are doing we have the 15% off. You will see NiSi filters on the website. I'm actually going to just post a link in the chat. If you didn't see it, I posted links in the chat for some of the tools that Roger was mentioning there. I've used some stuff like that in the past too. Photo Pills I have heard of is very good. I have one very similar to that I already have purchased, but I actually really want to pick up that Photo Pills app now.
Yeah, I hear a lot about it too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the Sun Surveyor I hadn't heard of. That's pretty cool. But I use some of the different dark sky maps and things like that too for Milky Way photography.
Yeah, really I'll pretty much do the same thing for the most part. Just like different interface, but pretty much almost the same thing.
Exactly. There's tons of tools out there, of course. So it's really awesome to be a photographer nowadays with all the tools that we have.
Absolutely.
Sure. So if you order from our website, it already has it built into there. We have the 15% off on all the products. You'll see those on there. I was just going to mention right now the orders are through the website for the NiSi filters. We're hoping to have a demo unit in the store soon, but right now we wouldn't have one here that we can actually show you yet. But like I said, we're working on that. You can order them through the website and we can drop ship them directly to you, or if you want to pick up in the store, we can work with you on that too. And then of course, let us know if you have any questions, give the store a call. If you have any questions right now for Roger, make sure and type those in the chat, or if you press the little raise hand feature in the Zoom participants panel, then we will see you. You'll pop to the top of the list, and we can even unmute you real quick. So we'll probably unmute you. You can ask the question. We'll mute you again, and then Roger can answer that. And if we don't have any questions, I was just going to ask Roger if you could explain the differences. I was kind of looking through some of the filters and systems on here, some of the different features of some of the different holders. I see there's a V6, there's the regular 100 millimeter, and there's also the one, it looks like it lets you rotate them independently.
You're talking about the switch, right?
The switch, yes.
Yes, yeah. So basically, that's with that's specific to the when you're using grads. So if you want to have one, 90 degrees to the right, and then you want a second one, 90 degrees on the left, you can do that with the switch. So that's what that does.
That's really neat. And then you're saying the V6 is the one that will lock into place. So if you're switching filters a lot and you already kind of have everything lined up,
yeah,
redoing that all the time.
Exactly, and that comes in really handy.
Cool. Yeah, that would be a really nice feature. That's awesome. And then you have a variety of, the other thing I was going to talk about too is the V6 the one with the CPL, the polarizing filter? It has an actual geared movement on there so that you can rotate the filter even when you have the square filters in there already.
Right. So there's the V6 right here. So we just take it off. The main adapter itself has the CPL, and then it's got the little knob right there. And so you can see it spinning right there. Yeah. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's, I can't understand. That's actually a really, really nice feature. You have to be able to adjust that. And if you didn't have something like that, you'd have to take the square filters off or have some way to reach in there, and it could mess with the entire setup.
Exactly. There's if you have it in the front, it just becomes really cumbersome. But with this, you just remove the filter holder, and then if you're going to use like a really dense filter, like a tent stop, remove it, you get your exposure, you set your polarization, and then you can easily just put it back on. It's kind of hard to do with one hand. And then, you're good to go.
Yeah, that's a really nice setup. Polarizing filters are really, really nice.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to just talk about real quick, I think we got a little bit of time. And there's one question. We'll get to that in a second, Patricia, one sec. But I was going to talk about one nice thing about, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you want to add on to this, but one thing that I think is really cool that is a goal with graduated neutral density filters is capturing as much information as you can with the histogram too. I think that's something that Ansel Adams has even talked about. And I think it has to do even with the zone system, is you're trying to get your exposure and everything compressed into there. So you have the most, you're still going to edit that raw file or edit that picture after the fact, but you get as much information in there so you're not blowing out highlights or underexposing certain parts of the picture. It might not necessarily mean that the picture's ready to go, but you have as much information to work with. What would you agree with that? Or
I agree with that 100%. Yeah, it's best to get everything in camera as much as possible. And I always shoot raw. So
yeah,
I'll have JPEGs, just for quick reference. But like you mentioned, the capture process, that's your raw meat. And then you take that into your preferred editing software, whether it's Adobe or Capture One or whatever. That's where you really cook, and then that's where you make it come to life. And so, being able to use the graduated filters, it avoids a lot of post-processing, a lot of, time spent on the computer, stacking exposures and all that stuff. And you just really all have it in one shot. And I like to spend as little time as possible on the computer.
I completely agree. I worked in computers for a little over a decade. And one of the reasons that I got into photography was to get out and shooting and not necessarily be sitting on the computer all day long. So
exactly,
which you can definitely do with digital photography. You got to get on the computer a little bit, but the more the filters make it a lot more fun for sure. And polarizers too. Don't underestimate those, everybody, because there's certain things you cannot do without a polarizer. You can't post-process that reflection out of the water and see underneath it unless you're going to fake it with some kind of 3D thing, and then you're going to be on the computer a lot longer.
Exactly.
But that's another one of my favorite filters.
Exactly.
And then we do have a couple questions. So Patricia said, for a fairly newbie to photography, what filters would you recommend? So kind of probably like, what would you start with?
Okay. A 6-stop is actually a really good starter filter, because with that one, you can really do quite a bit with it. You can get some decently long exposures with it. You can get some movement in clouds. You can also, it's perfect for shooting waterfalls and ocean. So I think if you're gonna go with just one filter, that would be the one that's a good filter to start with. Even a 10 stop, but you know, with a 10 stop, you have to play more with your aperture a little bit, and you can't close it down as much. So I think that's where the 6 stop can really just help you experiment. And then from there, once you play with that one, you'll kind of know where you want to go. If you want to go even longer or shorter. But I think the 6 stop is a good starter.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, I usually find that's a great range. Three
Yeah,
stops can be a lot of fun too, but I think you're right. The 6 stop is going to be more versatile, especially if it's a little bit brighter. 3 stop might not always get you that long exposure you need.
exactly.
I will say 10 stops and even higher stops can be a lot of fun though too when you get into it a little bit more.
Yeah,
I've done 4 to 8 minute exposures sometimes, just playing around. You know, you're sitting
yeah,
there waiting around a little bit for that camera to finish, and if you have long exposure noise reduction, you're waiting even more. But
exactly.
but it's a lot of fun. You can't see through the 10 stops a lot, so a lot of that is kind of composing and focusing beforehand, and then throw that 10 stop on there. But
Exactly. And that's where, you know, the system that we have here comes in really handy, because you can compose your shot, get it polarized exactly how you want. And then you can just have the 10 stop on there, and then you throw it on there, and then you're good to go. So that's
yeah,
a really neat thing about the V6.
that is really nice, because the previous systems that I've had, I had to take the filters out. It was not easy to just take the holder off and on, so
Right.
you're kind of messing with it and hitting the camera more. So that is
Yeah.
cool.
Tedious and cumbersome. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love that. Let me see. Would you recommend an ND1000 for beach long exposure?
Yeah, that the ND1000, that's actually a 10 stop. So yeah, we definitely. Um, or maybe they can answer this question. Are they looking to do like midday, or did they say sunset?
He just said beach long exposure.
Long exposures. Um, if you're gonna, if you know, usually when you're out on the beach, you're at the height of the heat and, you know, the day. So I would even recommend maybe a 15 stop, you know, for something like that. But it really depends on what exactly it is that you're trying to shoot. So if you're trying to get rid of people, 15 stop is going to help you a lot more. We even have a 20 stop. It's called the black hole.
Wow.
It's really dense and it's really dark. And you know, that'll definitely help in really getting some long exposures there. But you're gonna have to deal with pixel noise and all that kind of stuff, because the longer that your shutter's open, the hotter that your sensor is gonna get. So you're gonna get these little hot spots that you're gonna have to clone out later. That can be a pain.
Yeah, for sure. That is a good point with long exposures. I've played with the 15 stops before, and that's when I was doing those 4 or longer exposures. And if you go beyond that too, it will get hotter and hotter, and you'll get more hot pixels, things like that for
Yeah,
sure. The long exposure noise reduction will help with that, but then you're waiting the exact same amount of time afterwards. So it depends on how much you're willing to kind of let it sit around, I think.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah, I agree. That's really good advice. And it does depend on the time of day too. You know, you can probably get away with like a 3 to a 6 stop if it's later in the day and it's getting darker and you just want to blur the waves a little bit, would you say?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. We got a few more questions coming in. Lynn says, I only have the round screw-on type ND filters. If I figure out my composition and original exposure, etc., before adding a 10 stop ND, will I be able to see through the viewfinder or live view on the Nikon Z6?
Viewfinder, no. With a 10 stop, especially if you're shooting late in the day, no, it's gonna pretty much cut off all that light, and you
Yeah.
won't be able to. So you have to do everything before you thread that circular filter on there. Live view, maybe. I know with live view, it tends to compensate for that, and so, but it's not going to be the clearest picture, because I've done that before where I put on a really dense filter, and it's really grainy. And so if you're trying to do everything after you put the filter on, it's hard to focus. It's hard to like really see where all the elements are in the frame. So I would definitely recommend that you do it before putting on the filter.
Yeah. Yeah, Lynn, with some of the live view or some of the electronic viewfinders, some of them will boost it quite a bit. It will get pretty noisy and it won't look very good, like Roger was saying. Sometimes maybe I could see on a 10 stop a little bit, but most of the time, no. It's going to be very hard to see through it if you can. It's a 10 stop and up. You really want to set your focus first, set your composition, get everything ready so that you're basically just putting the filter on there and then figuring out the exposure from there.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be, it's going to be really hard to compose. Maybe if it's a super, super bright midday type of thing, you might be able to
Right,
see
like
a little bit.
high noon or something, like 2
Right.
o'clock. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Right,
sure.
exactly. But I've shot on a pretty bright day with the 10 stop where I was still able to do over a minute. So, you know, I mean, it was kind of cloudy, but still, it was not a dark afternoon. So,
Right.
all right, let's see. What do we got next? David says, how do you determine which size of square filter you should get for your lens? Say you have a 77 millimeter diameter to avoid vignetting.
So he's talking about square filters, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It really depends on your lenses that you use. So say, for example, here, good question. If you're using a really wide lens, like a 16 to, no, I'm sorry, to 12 to 24, that's very right. And there's no thread on those. So you wouldn't be able to mount the main adapter of the V6 to that. So that's where you would need to go with like a really large 150 millimeter system. So it really depends on your lens, the lenses that you have at the moment. But with the V6, you can go on a full frame camera up to 16 millimeter wides. And most of those have like a 77 to 82 millimeter front thread. And the V6 would work really well. And I think the V6 is really the most versatile choice that we have, because it's going to fit the majority of lenses that are out on the market, unless you're using like one of those really large, not large, really wide, 12 to 24 lenses. Then you'll have to go even bigger with the filter. So if you're using like a small compact camera, like the Fuji XT, what is it? What's the newest one? The XT4, right?
XT4, yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty compact. We have the M75 system, which is, smaller than the V6, and it's not as bulky, but you have the same polarizer, the same quality glass. It's just in a smaller package. But if you see yourself upgrading your lenses in the future, to something really wide or not, it really depends on your lenses. It's kind of a hard, tricky question to answer unless I have an idea of your, what lenses you plan to buy in the future, or if what you have is what you're going to stick with from now to the end of time, But the V6, I think, is pretty much a very robust and versatile system. And the 100 millimeter system, it works for just about 98% of all lenses out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, totally. I totally agree. The 100 millimeter is going to work on most full frame and even crop frame sensors with some of their widest angles, until you get to the ultra wide angles like that 12-24 you mentioned. I've used 100 millimeter systems with 16 millimeter on a full frame, and it still works fine. Yeah. So it's very specialized to go to, like, the 150 is there though. So if you do have those ones, like Nikon has the 14-24, or there's that 12-24. And those take that special adapter, so you can even get it on there because they don't have a filter thread. And that's where you go to the bigger ones typically.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. And let's see. So Ekman family asks, what is the best budget, most versatile friendly filter? Or would it still be the 6-stop? And so just kind of for a tighter budget. For
tighter budget, okay. We do have the Explorer line. That is, I think it ranges between 130 something. Don't quote me on it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's it's about $30 to $40 difference from our standard standard filters that we have, and they're great filters. They're virtually they're virtually the same. They're slightly different in the sense that they're made out of hardened glass, so there's a little bit more to it that gives it that property of being a little bit more durable. So if you were to drop it, it's not going to break, but it's definitely a little more affordable if you're on a tighter budget. And we do offer them in 3, 6, and 10 stops. And those are the main ones that you would want to start off with. So if you're looking for something budget friendly, I would say the Explorer line is a good option.
Yep, I'm looking at those right now. They're about 140, 139.
Yeah.
Compared to some of the other ones, 170, 180, things like that.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, there's the 15% off. I don't know if that's built in on those ones right here. So if you check our website, Action Camera, we have that on there too. So that would be a great way to start for sure.
Yeah.
And then if you do have a smaller system and you can go with like the 75mm filters, then you can always save money there. Those will be a little bit cheaper as well.
Yeah.
One thing I just wanted to bring up, just so there's no confusion too, when we're talking about the 100mm system, we're talking more of the width. So when you look at the graduated filters, they will be taller. So they'll say they're 100 by 150mm. That's not the 150mm system. Those are a bigger width. So a bigger holder. So
yeah, good point. Thanks for bringing that out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about the width here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So just so there's no confusion, you're looking for that first number, the 100 times whatever it is. So, and then I just saw another question from Leonard. I just wanted to address. I kind of talked. I said it in chat real quick, but just so everybody hears it. Leonard asked, "Is it necessary to cover the viewfinder with mirrorless cameras when shooting long exposure?" It's not really, because there's no possibility of light leak. The viewfinder's not connected to the sensor box where the lens connects and everything. That's really for mirrored cameras, because when you have a really long exposure, that light can get through there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's basically the mirror that reflects, to the viewfinder that's causing that light leak. But mirrorless cameras don't have that mirror to begin with. So yeah, no, you're good with, if you have a mirrorless, you're golden. You're good. Yeah.
And some cameras even have a shutter built in. The gap tape is genius though, by the way. I always have gap tape in my bag.
Yeah.
But that's a really handy way. But some cameras like the Nikon, for example, the main ones I know of are like the Nikon D800 series. They have a little shutter on there so you can just shut the viewfinder right away.
Yeah.
Some cameras will come with that little clip-on piece, but of course that gets lost. So that's why the gap tape is really handy.
Exactly.
For sure.
Already,
you can definitely, one tip on the mirrorless, if you are shooting and it's really dark, if you're not using the viewfinder, switch it to the back screen and just use the back screen. And most will give you a mode where you can turn the viewfinder off and you'll actually save a lot of battery that way. The viewfinder uses more battery than the back screen. It sounds funny, but the viewfinder is a lot higher resolution. So it takes more battery to run it. So let's see. Monica asked, are the PowerPoint pages available to download? And I'll let you answer that, but I was just gonna let everybody know that we are recording this too, and it's gonna go on Action Camera's YouTube channel. So you will be able to reference the video, but I'll let Roger answer on the PowerPoint.
I mean, if you're interested in it, I can provide the PowerPoint. I don't mind.
Yeah, what I would do is contact us at Action Camera. I can get you in touch with Roger, and you guys can work that out directly.
Yeah.
You can get you the PDF copy or however you guys want to do that. Let me see, make sure I didn't miss anybody. Joe asks, can handheld photos be taken with filters, or is a tripod always necessary?
Good question. Something I didn't mention. Tripods are absolutely necessary, especially if you're doing really long exposures. If you're doing anything, slower than 30 seconds, you can handhold a 1/20th of a second shot, but anything beyond that, it's gonna be impossible. And you have to be really, even to get if you're at 1/20th of a second, you got to be like super still.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially when most of the things we're talking about landscape, you're using the filters to get that longer exposure. So you're kind of defeating any ability to handheld, and you're going to just get a much nicer shot on a tripod.
Yeah,
for sure. So the only time I guess you could say, which wouldn't really be a landscape thing, but sometimes if you're trying to shoot a wide open aperture for portraiture and blur the background and you're mixing in flash, or if it's too bright outside, if you're limited on shutter speed, then sometimes you can use a filter to shoot at a wider open aperture. But again, that's not really for landscape. That'd be the only time I could think you could do that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.